can cut. So here we are for another Friday on a Connect and Share. I don't know where everyone else is coming from, but geez, I think I've had enough rain to last me a lifetime. I'm going to say that until the next drought anyway. Thank you all for joining us for this this Friday morning. As I said, there's a lot going on, and we want to give you of exactly what is going on. But before we do that, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands which we all meet today. I come to you from Darug and Gurungai country in the northwest area of Sydney, and may I pay my respects to those elders past, present and emerging in our communities here and to your areas, of which we need to adapt and invite them into our activities and help us to understand more about how we can interpret the history that's gone so much before us and bring that to life for our visitors and our participants every day. So let's kick on, and the first thing, I have a beautiful video to show you, which Juliet knows only too well, but Take 3 for the Sea. You might remember there was a few sessions last year that we brought to you, and Take 3 were doing an amazing initiative with our support and also National Parks and Wildlife support in looking at rubbish and litter in our environments, which we use for all of our activities. And we engaged the tourism side, we engaged our operators, and I just wanted to share with you the beautiful video they've compiled as a result of the first wave.
I'm John, and I run Southern Cross Kayaking, a kayak hire and tour company.
Yeah, I run a business called Marung Marai. Marung Marai means good spirit in the Wabaka language.
My name's Joe. I'm the activities manager here at Glenworth Valley.
So Irukandji is a conservation hub. So we are an aquarium, but we're an interactive aquarium.
I do Christian outdoor education. So what that involves is kind of adventure-based learning with kids.
My name is Laurie Mode. I'm the CEO of Outdoors New South Wales and ACT. That's a peak body for all things outdoor recreation, activity and adventure.
First Wave Tourism Program is an opportunity for Take 3 for the Sea to talk to tourism operators about litter. We found that nobody had actually been talking to the tourism industry about litter, and it was an opportunity to start the conversation with them and identify what the challenges are and what we can do together to solve those issues.
Litter's a massive thing for me. It's becoming more and more of a problem. I really want to make sure that I'm doing my part and us as a business here at Glenworth are doing our part to prevent any litter that we can.
Well, we have a lot of plastic on beaches where we are. It makes me ill being a custodian of this land. The resources that sustains you is you have to acknowledge that respect and look after country. You know, there's no two ways about it. You know, pick up that bit of rubbish, you know.
The tourism operators, you know, we have a responsibility to look after the environments that we rely on so much and to ensure that the visitors we bring really respect and have consideration for the environments, because we need to protect it for future visitors and obviously for future sustainability of the environment and of our business.
Take 3 were really proactive in contacting us and a lot of other organisations in the area and saying, hey, we want to get you guys together and discuss how you can be aware of being a bit more environmentally friendly in how you operate. It's the first time other organisations in our area, we've actually sat down, chatted to them and go, oh yeah, we've got that problem too. How did you fix that?
The First Wave project reached out to us here at Glenworth Valley and invited us to do an online webinar. And after joining that webinar, we discussed ways that the tourism industry can prevent litter, and Glenworth Valley being one of the biggest tourism businesses on the Central Coast, and if not New South Wales, we take a big priority in trying to prevent that litter.
Well, a lot of organisations say, oh, it's just too hard, it's too overwhelming. What Take 3 did really well is say, no, actually, there's so many little changes you can make to what you're already doing. It doesn't cost you anything, your clients will be happy, and you guys can feel better about how you're operating, and your area will be cleaner.
And in tourism, it does have an impact. You're bringing a lot of people into sort of remote and pristine areas. It's important to get the message across to not leave litter and not leave waste behind.
Being involved with those other businesses was really helpful. Learning their ideas that they have and what they're implementing in their own business gave us a platform to be able to develop and progress things that they have thrown our way. And yeah, it's a really good initiative getting everyone involved together.
The First Wave Tourism project is really, really awesome. It gives all the operators everywhere really great insights into what they can do. And for us, it gives us an opportunity to share all of our learnings over the years with them and what's worked best for us.
We've had over 80 operators participate in the First Wave tourism program. We've surveyed, we've run workshops with operators, and we've already got a number of them that have implemented initiatives that are already providing amazing impact and results.
They've given us so many brilliant ideas that we've just never thought were options. And so, you know, I was chatting to some of their team. They said, hey, you do canoeing, you do a lot of water stuff already. Why don't you just take some bags out with you or some containers out with you? And all the things that kids find, you can make a game out of it. And so we were like, we've never thought of that. That's a great idea. And we really hate that schools make picking up rubbish a punishment. And so Take 3 helped us go, no, it can be a game. And little kids love it. And then when they go back to school, they can actually, you know, keep their class accountable. So it's something that they don't just do an activity on camp, but we're able to help them transfer that learning back to their little school and their community.
I think the biggest thing about this program for me has been the conversations and the fact that the workshops have brought the tourism operators together, having the conversations together and somewhat empowering each other to come up with solutions. That for me already has proved its worth in spades.
We'll do lunches outside, and a few of the guys we were chatting to said just get permanent trays that the kids can take out. They wash up really easy and you've just eliminated single use. You might have a camp of 60 kids and they come through, they have lunch, you know, 5 lunches in a week. That's a lot of plastic plates and cutlery that's going out. And so being able to chat to another organisation that said, we've already got a solution, yeah, that was really good.
Our litter prevention strategy that we've developed now is that we include that litter message in our face-to-face briefings when we have our clients arrive. We've also just included it on our website as well. So we're getting that sort of clarity of messaging just subliminally, just keep ticking away at it. So it's getting the message out there.
When anyone makes a booking, they'll get sent our campground terms and conditions. Within our terms and conditions, there's a section that asks people to dispose of their rubbish properly. We've got clearly visible bins in all the campgrounds, both recycling and general waste. And just recently we've implemented speciality bins for the glass bottles, plastic bottles and aluminium cans.
We actually don't have any plastic in our fridge, and we haven't done for quite a few years. And obviously we definitely return and earn. We keep all of the cans, and having the big container of cans there is great to show the value of it to other people as well.
On the tours, we sort of encourage people to pick up any rubbish that's floating around in the water, and we've had a couple of tours in areas on the Hawkesbury where there was quite a bit of litter, and you know, some people got very enthusiastic and ended up with a great big pile on the front of the kayak by the time we got back, which was, yeah, really good to see.
There are a lot of visitors who actually like getting involved in solving the problem.
I've seen and heard some of our operators building in litter removal into the narrative of their experience and the importance of that. And I don't know if it happened before, but I love the fact that they've been listening to the workshops and participating in that and taking that away. And it can only improve everyone's awareness of the fact, but also the benefits and the outcomes of the project.
This project is a New South Wales Environment Protection Authority Waste Less, Recycle More initiative, which is funded by the Waste Levy.
So I just want to say congratulations to Take 3. They did an amazing job with that project, engaged a lot of operators and had some great conversation, which you can see. I hope you all took away something from that. And if there's something that you can add to your experience in relation to this, that would be wonderful. But Juliet, what's next? Take 3 is still off and running with more projects.
Oh. That's right. Well, thank you so much, Laurie, and thank you to Outdoors New South Wales and your members, for the valuable contribution that you made with First Wave last year, which was the project last year. And the video gives me goosebumps. It's incredible, and what fabulous partners to be working with. Yes, so thanks to the success from last year, we've been granted funding again by the EPA to roll out a project that we're calling Groundswell. So the Groundswell will continue and build on the great work that was done last year in the First Wave. So Take 3's aim is to assist the tourism community in reducing litter in visitor hotspots by 30% and to phase out problematic and unnecessary plastics by 2025. So this is all in line with the New South Wales Government commitment to reduce litter in visitor hotspots by 60% by 2030. So that's where the targets come from. So Groundswell launches on March the 9th this year. Take 3 for the Sea is rolling out a practical turnkey program empowering New South Wales tourism businesses to take the lead, to develop and implement action plans to address litter and plastic waste, and to truly make a difference in keeping their beautiful tourism destinations litter-free. In 3 phases between March and November, we'll take you and your business on a litter reduction strategy journey. We'll provide you with a toolkit to help you incorporate litter reduction actions into your day-to-day business operations, provide practical suggestions as to how to include your staff and customers, and how to conduct a before and after litter check in your area. We'll help you measure and enjoy your success and keep the momentum going moving forward, and you will be amazed at the impact you can make. So the project is funded by the EPA. There's no cost involved to participate, and participants will benefit from a Take 3 official supporter package, which is worth $5,000 and allows you all sorts of benefits, including using the Take 3 logo on any material to show that you're part of this project. So please join us, please join us. Please provide your email and organisation name, and we can send you information and invite you to be part of Groundswell if you're not already our partner already. And I can provide Laurie with a link to just a form which we'll collect. It's an expression of interest, really. We'll collect the details, and in a couple of weeks we'll be launching, and we'll send you out further information. Thank you, Laurie, for this opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
And I will make sure that I put it into the newsletter next week as well, so that they can act on that if they want to get involved. But yeah, well done again, and please send my best to Roberta and the crew who did pull that video together. And it's an amazing.
Yes, it gives me goosebumps. Yes, certainly I will do. Okay, so I'll sign off here. Thank you very much indeed.
You're more than welcome to join us for the rest of the session, but I understand if you need to depart as well.
Thank you. Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye. So let me just do a quick run through on the need to knows for this week, and then we're going to jump into some very, very important information for our camp operators and outdoor educators. So first of all, the mentor program kicks off next week, and with a surge of mentees, we're needing more mentors now. So a bit of a switch to what we had last week, where we were seeking some mentees. That obviously proved its weight, and thanks, Jeffrey, for holding the fort last week and promoting that. You did overwhelmingly well in that, and now we're needing a few more mentors. So if you are someone that's had experience in the industry, it doesn't matter what part of the industry, there is no requirement, just that you feel you have something to give back to people that are seeking for a mentor. Please jump on and register to be a mentor, and we'll be in touch very soon. But yeah, it's going to be a fabulous program kicking off next Tuesday with all of our mentees and mentors, courtesy of Small Business Month and also Paddy Palin. So now the next one, look, I'm going to keep saying this until I know that everyone has acted on this, but this is incredibly important. It's the New South Wales Child Safe Scheme, remembering that it is now legislation as of the 1st of February for you to now abide by the child safe standards in New South Wales. ACT has got some standards as well that they're advising through their government, but certainly in New South Wales, this is very new and needs to be looked at as soon as physically possible. If you haven't already, you can scan that QR code. It'll take you to all the resources that they provide under the Office of Children's Guardian. We've covered all the funding and support that are out there, and I will just reiterate that if you haven't already been part of the Discover and Stay vouchers, that registration is still open, and if you are struggling with hardship, there is the grant still available. But the one I wanted to highlight today, which is now open, is the Small Business Support Program. So if you had a decline in turnover of more than 40% in January and in the first 2 weeks of February due to Omicron, you need to show the balance of that loss to apply for this grant, and you get one payment for the 4-week period of February. That could be $750 to $5,000 a week if you're employing, or it could be $500 per week if you're not employing. So can I stress that you need to get onto that website and apply. Applications close at the end of March. So if you have suffered that decline, jump in and make sure you apply for that grant. And the other one that's coming up, which I've mentioned before, thanks to some negotiation with the state government on our Term 4 issue with school policies, we've been able to negotiate a $14 million pool of funding for our people that would normally activate in schools or have schools as their clients. And Term 4, as we know, we weren't able to do that. So the details are being finalised. We're still in negotiations with the Department and Treasury on that, which is great that we've got that open communication and working through that together. We will certainly get that content to you as soon as we have it, but we're expecting that details and applications will be open in April. Grants. There's the mental health in sport grants. Now, I've spoken to some of you about these grants because of the fact around sport versus active recreation. I have clarified that with the provider of this grant. It's now under health. It used to be under the Office of Sport. And in talking with the grant provider, you need to demonstrate that it is active activity that would be certainly qualified for this grant. So if it is non-active or non-adventurous, then it might not qualify, but certainly if it acts in a capacity where it provides health and well-being support on an active and physical nature, then you could apply for this grant. Now, I don't think Bruce has joined us, unfortunately, but Bruce was going to say a big g'day to everyone. So we might hang that over until next week. But in the meantime, we have an amazing research piece that we have commissioned in partnership with the Office of Sport to get you some content on what is happening in the area of school camps and what are some of the challenges that we are seeing in this space. So I'm so pleased that Carolyn is with us now, and she's going to take us through her findings live from England. So thank you so much for joining us. She had to duck over quickly, and she's still working while she's over in the UK. So thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. And I'll just start sharing my screen with you so you can get the presentation. And this is being done live, so and it's quite late, as Laurie said, at night, so hopefully this will work. Now, can you all see a big green screen saying not the screen of death, thankfully? Not yet. Okay, let me have a look. Let me see. Oh yes, sorry, it's not
Let me do.
Sorry, it's my own fault. I've got a new Apple computer, so all of the settings are not there. But we do have a backup plan, which is Laurie if things go wrong. So I have
it right here. So let me just share this.
Yeah, I think that might be best, Laurie. If you do, I will duck back out.
You can go ding when you want to turn the page.
I will do. So thank you for that. It wouldn't be. It's been a very intense day to be in Europe. So we've been all looking east, wondering if we need to start building our nuclear bunkers in the backyard. So Do forgive me. So Laurie mentioned this is research. I think we probably need, Laurie, if you could skip to the next slide, please, so we can just do the run through. We need to be clear, this is very much interim research. Now, this research was commissioned last year. And what we've been trying to do is nip and tuck in when we think we've got the mindset of schools with us around shutdowns, reopenings, changing COVID rules, etc. So we were very much hoping we would have had the final results for you here, but we will be talking about what we found so far. One advantage of that we'll talk about a little more at the end of the presentation is that creates an opportunity for conversations between Laurie and myself, and also any feedback from all of you today. So we'll talk about what we were trying to find out, a little bit about how we did it. Researchers always love to tell you that stuff. If I have the right clients, I call it the boring but essential bit. No one really wants to sit here and talk methodology, by the way, including me, but it just helps with context when we get later through the presentation. We'll talk about who's participated so far, and then we'll talk about some of those drivers and barriers and what we know about those so far. So basically when Laurie and I started this conversation last year, the conversation we had is, we're not even sure how many schools don't even have an outdoor education program. So the first step is to get some kind of handle, however difficult, on that. And then from that understanding of the demand pool, work out what are the drivers and barriers to get more people doing it or more often. And I think there are some interesting tactical questions around whether it's about growing yield. It's all sounding very familiar from our other tourism work, or whether it's about trying to reach people who don't currently do it. Because I mean, it was interesting looking at the pictures of kayaking. I can safely say that the ability to kayak during lockdown last year was my mental and physical health. So I think that we all want to see kids have that benefit and understand some of those benefits, but what gets in the way and what of that can we do something with? So that was the context of this, and this was the kind of big picture that we had for that. So basically what we had to do, what we looked at and what we discussed doing were 3 broad steps. And they are to a certain extent sequential. The latter 2, because of all the delays we've had around where schools have been at, are going to overlap a little bit. But one of the concerns we had was if we went out and did a big questionnaire right up front, said to people, look, tell us all about your participation in outdoor education, we wouldn't be able to do the market sizing. So we actually said we'll do a very short, sharp quant survey at the beginning, just to say who is participating. And then we would get people to opt in or either take part in an interview or to then go on and complete a longer questionnaire to deep dive that. We would start that deep dive process, which is a series of one-on-one interviews with people who participated in the market sizing operation, and try and understand the issues and then shape that third part of the questionnaire. So we're partway through that. The good news is overall we've got a reasonable mix of schools in there. On both of those first stages would have been great to have, as we'll see, a little bit more public mix in there. But what we will do with the final data is we will weight it to be representative of the New South Wales school market. So the final results of this, the percentages may vary, the patterns will not, based on what you've seen. And we're currently finalising that section on the barriers and drivers. What we've done instead is to do a scan of the horizon, to do some a desktop review. And from that, we've brought in a couple of studies. Now, interestingly, one of those studies was conducted in 2004. And 2 salient points stood out from that. One, what we heard in our deep dive so far very closely correlates with that, despite a very slightly different context. And the second thing is that their opening paragraph, as academic papers want to do, talks about a dearth of research in the area. I think the combined efforts of Laurie and I have demonstrated that this many years on, almost 18 years on, that dearth is still there. But what we do see is a great deal of consistency in that. So let's get into the bit that you're all really interested in. And the first of these is to try and understand who we spoke to and what that response looks like. So the first of those things is, did we get a good mix across the state? And who did we get to talk to? So we pretty much we tied the question about profile broadly to the education areas. And I think you can see that across the entire state, we got about 320 people in this market sizing, which I have to say was actually comparable, if not slightly better than the study that was done in 2004, which in the context of everything that schools have had on this year, I think is great. So we had just under 2/5 of them are within the Greater Sydney area, and then a good spread around the rest of the state and around 2% in ACT. So we have both New South Wales and ACT represented, and we do have a good spread of different kinds of regional areas. Majority of the people who participated was the principal or a very senior member of the exec team. The other tended to be heads of phys ed, using different titles. So quite often people, if they didn't see exactly their title, they might put that in as where they came from. But basically about 3/4 of them were principals. That's probably not too surprising, as we sourced the contacts from two places. One was a list provided to us by Office of Sport, and that went to a central admin email address. And we had about just under 2,500 of them and that was all the public schools. And then on top of that, we purchased a list, which Laurie still has access to for the purposes of future work, where we talked to public, independent and religious schools. We held about 1,800 of those schools, and there we actually had named contacts, which I think was one of the reasons that we did see slightly more of them respond, in that all of us tend to respond to a personal request rather more than a please help us. We did try participation to support for a charity. The amounts were not large in themselves, in that it was $1 for the opt-in survey on the short screening questionnaire. And then the second one was we paid $60, which is pretty much around half to a third of what we would normally pay. And that was a donation to a charity. Our nominated charity was the Smith family because of its alignment to educational values. But for the in-depth interviews, we did give people the option to nominate another relevant charity. Laurie, if you could flick to the next page. So we asked schools to tell us to the nearest 50. It's amazing how many principals actually don't know that 51 is not the nearest 50, interestingly. So we asked them how many they did and coded those responses back. And you can see that around half the sample, so 24% in that kind of 100 to 250, and a similar number in the 250 to 51. So that's kind of the center of gravity there. But we did get schools from the smallest, just at that kind of up to 50 level, all the way up to the 751 to 1,000 school sizes coming through. So we got a very, very good range of different school sizes. And we also got a mix of different schools. So just over half were from the public sector, just over a quarter were independent religious schools, 7% were other independent schools, and a mix of other please specify included things like special needs schools, and variations. Again, one thing I did find is that people were very inclined to say, if that's not the wording I would describe my school as. So, for example, some of those other consider themselves, for example, Catholic schools, and that there's a designation that might mean something more to you than to me, but specific Catholic schools. So again, we did get a good mix of different types of schools to be able to understand and tease apart some of those differences where they existed in behavior. In terms of the age range of the pupils that we got, so we asked people a question which was, select which of these you have students from. So those of you, probably most of you will see that we got over 100% response there. Around 10% of the schools we talked about literally taught all the way through from K1 through to year 12. 8% only taught at that bottom end, a fifth taught secondary only, 44% primary only. So quite a heavy skew into that primary sector only, but overall a good spread across the different types of schools. And numerically looking through the list, we did see that. We also asked people around whether or not they were a special needs school, whether or not they had accessible facilities. Now, initially, we just answered that as select either of these or not. And we found relative to other questions, we had a high proportion of people who didn't answer this question. We didn't make it obligatory. And so what we actually think is that there's probably within that 18% is a proportion of people who didn't want to admit that they were not accessible. And we did notice that that was slightly stronger among the independent schools. And maybe reasons like around that, for example, building constraints. But we did think maybe so we rebased this so that you could be clear how many people we actually knew from the total sample of responses really did that. But overall, 4 out of 5 were either special needs school or were fully accessible. Laurie, if you could click through. So the real money shot question for this part of the research was that participation. So which of these best describes your experience with outdoor education experiences? Have you never done it, not done it in the last 5 years? Some pupils, all pupils, other. And other was tended to be some pupils at some stages, but we'll touch on that a little bit when we go to the next question. But what we can see from this measure is that around 1 in 11 of the schools, at the very least in the last 5 years, have not been using outdoor education experiences. Now, we did provide a link to a definition of this, so people were able, if they weren't clear what it was. From some of the comments, I think there's still a little bit of a fuzziness around what we mean by outdoor education experiences. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we notice is that this was an opt-in survey. No one was obliged to participate. So it's likely that there is still some slight understatement of that never or not at all. But nevertheless, when we looked at these numbers, what we did see was probably slightly higher proportion of public schools in there, which does give us confidence that, you know, we were getting a reasonable mix. But I think if we were to say that between 10 and 15% of schools do not participate, that would give us a size of that. And to me, if I look at that and then compare, Laurie, could you just flip back for a moment? Thank you. If you look at that 29% of some pupils only, I think one of the things we'll be drilling down to in the final stages, and I think it's already something to start thinking about, is that question I touched on at the beginning, which is it better to try and go for persuading schools who aren't finding and persuading schools who aren't currently doing this to participate, or is it better to try and work with the schools who are doing something and see whether you can overcome them? Or indeed, of course, it is possible to do both, but I think it gets harder at that point. So I think that's very much perhaps our first question is, who do we start with as our target for growing outdoor education experiences? Laurie, if you could flick on, thank you very much. What is the nature of participation in outdoor education? So roughly equally split between compulsory and optional. So 42% saying it's compulsory, 45% saying it's optional. When we looked at the other and it depends, what we did tend to find there was often what people were doing was they wanted to provide us with more detail on what that it depends was. So the things that we heard were that it was compulsory subject to parental permission, which becomes quite important when we look at the drivers and barriers, or it's strongly encouraged but not compulsory. The it depends and the optional does include a number of people who say, well, if it's aligned to their course curriculum and it's the best option for that, that's who tends to go. And that was something that we did see quite a lot with the public schools, and indeed in the public school interview that we've done so far, is to say where we can clearly link it to curriculum outcomes, and very strongly and more effectively linked to curriculum outcomes relative to other things, that's where that would come through. And what we did also see, and we'll touch on this a little more in the moment, is that these are almost two ways of schools managing the same series of barriers and drivers, and we'll deep dive into that a little as we go through. So Laurie, if I could get you to turn to the next slide. So among those people who told us that they did do participate in some sort of outdoor education experiences, we asked them what type of facilities they did that at. We found around 1 in 6 had their own camps or facilities. 64% said they solely went to an external provider, and around a third said that it was a mixture of the two. The majority of that, your own camps and facilities, were people who were in the independent or religious sectors, tended to be the ones that had those facilities. We did have some public schools who said that, but my suspicion around that is often that was on their own campus education rather than having a dedicated facility. And we will be deep diving into that concept of what that means as we go forward. So, Laurie, can you just skip back for a moment for me, just very quickly? On that mixture, we saw, again, both in the public and private sector were in that a mixture. So we did see some of that, but again, my strong suspicion is that it's there. And those external providers, that was slightly understandably given the other way around, that skew was slightly more to an external provider. So Laurie, if you could zip through. So we understand that we've now got, around 85% of schools doing something, about roughly saying half saying it's compulsory, half saying it's optional. When we asked teachers in the deep dive what were the key values of doing it, it basically came down to 3 very strong ones and 1 slightly lighter one. The first one was, and this was absolutely universal in the interviews we've done so far, is that building key skills and confidence. And interestingly, those key skills and confidence, that's slightly built at the individual level as opposed to the social skills, which is that learning to interact. Teachers tended, particularly principals, tended to differentiate between the building you as an individual and building those social skills. But the number one top of the rank thing mentioned was that first one. They didn't tend always to talk about it in terms of physical activity or mental activity. What they talked about, and this was something I'm sure all the operators on this call will appreciate, was that magical moment where children discovered in themselves characteristics and qualities that they didn't know they had. And that emotional element to this is very, very important. I think often we tend to talk about it in quite rational terms. So I think going forward, building into and not being afraid to build in some of that emotion to this, we need to kind of do the bedrock of the educational outcomes and tick the boxes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. But really creating and capturing that magic of that moment where a child grows within themselves and creates those memories and those magic, not just for the child, but bearing in mind most of the people who participate in studies like this are dedicated teachers and passionate teachers. It was a moment for them where their lives and choices were validated as well. And it really, their whole body language, and I'm trying to convey it in my body language, is their whole body moved. And when they talked about this, similarly, that social skills, they talked about the sense of learning to interact, particularly many kids these days might, on one end, you had the very privileged kids who might only be in homes of 1 or 2, but learning to interact with people from very different backgrounds. In others, people who might come from very fractured or disadvantaged backgrounds, and actually building and bringing those social skills together. So we really saw that those two things. So social skills are the only ones that they break out. And we'll investigate this further as we go through the last stages of the research. That's one area, but it is that sense of the resilient kid. And I think this is something, a few years ago, I did some work with Tourism Australia where we looked at, just before they stopped dealing in the domestic space, which obviously they came back to during the pandemic. And this was what we found was the unique feature of even an Australian family holiday, was that sense of building a uniquely Australian personality and a uniquely Australian kids that were resilient, building life skills, building skills that are all the skills that we need for the 21st century. On a more practical level, we do still need to tick those hygiene factors, particularly for public schools, where, you know, often this can be something that's, you know, it's competing for time, attention, resources. The more it can meet a large range of very specific curriculum outcomes, the better. And what we saw with the independent and religious schools, a driver of participation, not so much an either are we in or are we out, but who are we with and how are we doing it, was very much around the extent to which it was working with their particular values, their ethos, the kind of, if I can misquote, the castle kind of vibe of the school really coming through as driving that. So Laurie, if you could flick to the next slide for me, please. And here are some of the typical quotes that we saw from that. So, you know, at the end of the day, we're a Christian school. Outdoor education experiences need to reflect that moment when you see a child achieve something that they never thought that they would. You see that transformation happen. Almost no one comes back unchanged. I actually need to add the next bit into that, which is to say, including us. So that real sense of that emotion coming through and that sense of powerful connection in terms of what people were doing. We will be adding more commentary to that into the final report. Laurie, if you could flick to the next slide. So one of the two documents that we found that we did think had particular relevance to informing your thinking in this is some work that Tourism NT has done, trying to, so they actually have an activation plan to target Australian schools with what they call education tourism. Now, that covers a broader range of activities, but if you actually look at and read the report, and I do have the report, I'm very happy to share it, a lot of it sits very much in the space of outdoor experiences. On top of that, there is, of course, an Indigenous cultural heritage bit that's particularly strong, but that again is something that Outdoors New South Wales and ACT can really, really talk to and flag. And when they dug into this and pulled together everything that they could find and consulted, two key drivers for them: safety and security and relation to the curriculum. That's often when people talk about the top two, I would actually say in some ways those are basically cost of entry. You know, it's very, no one's going to sign off something where, not that, you know, some of the activities are not of themselves involving risk, but that you are managing and doing that risk in effective ways, and that they are able to justify that. So those were really those two, cost of entry. Then, of course, you come into the idea of cost and affordability. And that's not just the cost of the actual outdoor education experience, it's the cost of the logistics of getting people there, for example. Is it easy to adopt? And we will talk a little bit more about this as we go through. You know, is it easy, something that you can actually do and get to do quite easily? It shouldn't be, and interestingly, we find a lot of this. I do a lot of work also in the culture and heritage space. The word education is actually an incredible turn-off for kids. So it's got to be something where they think it's going to be fun. The accommodation is suitable for their needs, and that's particularly for special needs, but working with the school, structuring and planning of this, and then relevant information relating specifically to them. So they really, one of the things that we consistently heard in this is that it really needs to be quite, you know, I need to be able to immediately understand exactly what this is doing for me, not me as a generic school, but me as school XYZ in this location coming through. So if you could click to the next slide. All right, so this is also from the NT Activation Plan, and this is based on the 2014, the curriculum that was current in 2014. Of course, we have a new curriculum coming through, but I think many of the key points here was that they looked at this and said, well, what is that point where the best alignment is possible with the curriculum goals? And they said, look, it's really at that confluence where you can see all three of those areas done, or at the very least, learning areas and cross-curriculum priorities. And the public school participant in the in-depth research talked quite a lot. He said, look, if I could almost have a kind of matrix of here's all the things that this can do, and here are all the ticks that what you're going to do for me is that I can just take that, take it into my principal, take it into the people who need to sign this off, and they can just go, absolutely, we can see why this is the best way. It's not going to be any more efficient way for us to be able to tick that many boxes. That makes his job almost a case of, right, tick, we've done that job. Where do we sign? Let's sign up here. So that really is that sweet spot. And I did find that was quite a useful way. Laurie, any questions as we go through?
No, I just commented in there. I love that. I don't know if anyone has it, and if they do, that's awesome. If they have a matrix that looks at their activities and where it aligns to certain curriculum, what a great tool to be able to hand the school and say, here, if you want to tick these off, you can do this program. If you want to tick these off, you can do this program.
And you know, the more you can tick off, the better, really. Because the more that it really comes back to when we talk about value. When we talk about the barriers, we'll talk about value, and it really does drive to a value proposition, bearing in mind that other activities can compete for some areas of the curriculum. Laurie, did you want to flick to the next slide? Now, when we talked about the barriers, and we spent quite a lot of time in the interviews talking about this. Now, I don't think it's any surprise that cost is the #1 barrier, particularly for public schools, but even for some of the smaller independent schools, and also particularly for regional schools. And as I said, it's not just the idea of what does the activity itself cost, it's what's the cost of getting people there? Do we need to be paying people to do certain activities for us or get us there? Do we need to be bringing along and paying for other people to come? So there was that cost. And then, as I said, the idea of value. Now, this is where the idea of value started to divide a little bit between the public and the independent stroke religious schools, which is for the public schools, it's really how can we squeeze as much value out in terms of that matrix. Whereas value for the independent and religious schools was more emphasized through that, how is it more specific to that, to our ethos, to our values, to really working about what we as a school are about. We then did talk, now of the people we interviewed in the in-depth interviews, all of them were huge fans of outdoor education experience. We haven't managed to get anyone, it's very hard to persuade someone that they'll have something interesting to say when they don't get it, even though actually they would be very useful. So what we talked to the people, 3 of them were principals, one was a head of sport. We said, have you come across schools where it didn't happen or where you really had significant barriers to doing it? And we did see that they were saying, look, if the principal's not on board, it never happens. Because ultimately the principal's name is at the end of this line. And we do see principals who are risk averse, particularly kind of fearful and concerned around, you know, facing up to parents, often tended to emphasize more kind of intellectual activities coming through. So really sort of what is it if you have those schools? And again, I think there's a real debate about whether you go for the schools where the principal already gets it and try and upsell them and get them to do more with you, or whether you actually focus on trying to win over some of these principals. The second group is parents. And parents, basically what we saw there was kind of 3 areas of parent attitude that can be issues that schools need to deal with. So the first is the helicopter or bulldozer parent. You know, I want to protect my kids. I want to tuck them into this little niche and make sure that, you know, not only do I hover over them, but the bulldozer parent, so I'm going to smooth their path and make it easy. And that's where, you know, when you're comparing this to other types of activities, extracurricular activities, that can be a challenge. The second is where you have schools with significant levels of disadvantage, where if you're requiring parental consent, you're dealing with people who don't understand the value of this, or whose lives are in too difficult a place for them to appreciate this, or whose circumstances may prevent them from paying for it. You know, no one is going to be sending their kids on an outdoor education experience if that's this week's rent money. And the final one, and I think this is going to get more and more important. Now, the pandemic has slowed down Australia's migration, but the fact is that we are a highly multicultural society. You're all perfectly well aware of that. But what we do see is specific groups having very significant cultural barriers to sending kids away from home into these kind of environments. Might be religions might be one reason. So people from certain religious groups not wanting girls to go away, but that can also be cultural. So one of the principals I spoke to had Greek pupils. They never wanted their girls to go away and do this. Her solution to that was to make the girls come and do it on campus, where the parents where they went away overnight. And curiously, faced with having to be there all day waiting for their girls, that cultural barrier decided. But getting away and being aware of the cultural mix of the school and dealing with any issues relating to that and having imaginative solutions for dealing with that is very, very important. And the final set of attitudes we need to deal with is kids themselves. Kids being fearful, kids not feeling that ironically, the kids who would most benefit from this are often the ones who get given the letter to take home. And this tends to happen more particularly, I think, in the public sector. But we did hear this was, the letters go home, but we don't know if they're delivered by the kids. So the kid is given the letter, oh no, I'm far too scared to do that. That's not for me. I don't want, it won't be for me. That letter never reaches the parents. So this is where the very complexity of that barrier set is there to come through. And, with that wide range of things, we look at things like, many of the schools that we spoke to said, well, there's also that issue of, kids not wanting to burden their parents if they know their parents are hard up. Competition from other activities. So, and again, this links to that idea of what the principal values is. You're competing against cultural activities, you're competing against things done on campus. So what else is it? There's competition for time. But particularly in regional areas, one of the things that I think came through was that there is competition from the Australian lifestyle. I'm going to say we, because even though I'm sat in the UK, and you can probably tell I was born in the UK, I am an Aussie as well. So we in Australia live a very outdoors lifestyle, particularly in regional areas. We're campers, not all of us, but we're campers. We go out into the bush, particularly if you live in a regional area, kids will be cycling home through the bush. So in that context, you've actually also got to be demonstrating what a more structured program is doing versus the school taking everyone away camping for the weekend somewhere, versus parents taking their, so a typical comment from one of the principals was, look, pretty much all the parents at the school have their own tents, and they'll go off in groups of parents or just on their own with the kids and do it. And it then comes back to, are they getting what they need from the principal's point of view, but are they also having to do a job with convincing the parents? So ironically, all of the places that make Australia a fabulous place to do outdoor education experiences also provide a level of that. And then on top of that, there is the resourcing and the capacity of the school to organise itself. And that tends to be at both extremes. So one is, schools in areas of significant disadvantage who are dealing with very significant social problems, who have, parents who are very cash strapped, including some of the independent or fee paying schools where, it was a stretch for many of the parents to pay the fees to send the kids to the school. Extracurricular activities like this don't often get covered. But at the other end, it was also that if we can do it ourselves, and we, particularly the religious or independent schools, going, if we really want it tailored to our ethos, if we really want it aligned with, you know, apologies to anyone who is from that background, you know, our brand, which could be the ethos of us, any kind of school, or it could be that they're coming through a particular faith-based approach to looking at that. So really that capacity of the school to organize it is a barrier to whether or not they might take up education. So, and again, here are some of the quotes that come through. So as I said, you know, we're a fee-paying school, but we're in a regional area. Our fees are $4,000 a year, but for many of our parents, even to pay that's a struggle. You know, the cost of the transport there is a barrier because of the way our local bus company now schedules its driver shifts. So, you know, it used to be you just chucked everyone on a bus and you could go and do these things, and now that's become, you know, a very significant additional cost on the top. So are there ways that you can package up and deal with some of those other costs, those other transactions that really totally done for me, particularly for public schools? When we look at some of the other barriers, so this was from a study that Brent Ritchie, who's now at UQ, and Dwayne Coughlin when they were at Australian National University. So this is the 2004 review that I said, basically I read it through. Now their context was school trips to Canberra. But what really struck me reading this paper was how well it aligned with what we'd heard as a preliminary in the interviews that we've done so far, and in the comments that people put in that initial sizing questionnaire. So, you know, kind of the hard attributes that were there. So has it got the basics I need? Has it got enough to do? Is it going to be easy if we need to get people out of there in a hurry? Again, they've got that, the financial cost, but also some of those other elements to cost coming through. You know, how easy is it to organize? That came through. We saw that the same in the NT paper. And then how easy is it for the school itself to organize it, and those motivational elements. And one of the comments, and this was echoed in the interviews as well, was a sense that often there tended to be a kind of, this is what this looks like. Here's our package. And what schools were saying is, if I'm doing the here's our package, it's really got to tick every box, and it's just got to have done all that thinking, all that logistics, all that helping with the institutional stuff. But for other people, it was very much around how different or unique they felt themselves to be. And I felt that this comment from the Ritchie and Coughlin paper really caught what we were hearing from some of those. Now, what I would say on this, if you're looking at this and saying, look, that's not our situation, that's not our experience, then the issue is, how are we getting that misconnection, or who are the people that they're dealing with, and how do we connect them to you? You know, a major assumption is that the school market is generic or homogenous. The only commonality is that the market originates in schools, and that all of these things that make them different. So really having to understand the specifics of any school, and then to kind of build up from those specifics to find common themes, to find that the size of the market is really going to be one of the key ways to grow. Laurie, if you could click to the next slide. So we talked a little bit around these, what are the things that might do that? And I've touched a great deal on this, so I'm not going to go into it. It really did seem to fall into, and actually this is most of travel, people who just want you to do all the hard work for them. Do it all for us. And as I said, a skew in that to public schools, but all of that there, versus that we really want something that's totally unique, totally bespoke to us. And if you don't give it to us, we will. One of the people I interviewed had actually just set up their own facility because they really couldn't find what they want. So they'd gone off and built their own. Dealing with the costs, we had, sorry, I'm probably overrunning a little bit, sorry. Doing it all for us, let's making it our own grants and vouchers, and give us those tools to overcome attitudinal barriers. So give us the arguments to take to principals and parents. And it sounds like some of that's happening anyway, but very short, sharp, almost a few hours here and there warming up the kids. So nothing big and dramatic and costly, but things that would get people to try things before they bought on campus. Laurie, if you could turn to the next slide for me, please. When we talk to people about sales channels, now things like EDMs do work. I mean, all 300 of these and so of these people actually participated in a survey. But if I look at that as less than 5% of schools participating, and our result, as I said, was slightly better than the 2004 study, what people said is, we're looking for a gap, and I really think this is where Outdoors New South Wales comes in, where we can facilitate connection between a school, what we need as a school, and the providers that are right for our needs. And two ideas that came up. One was, now the NT strategy talks about education fairs, but somebody said it would be great to have an outdoor education experience fair where you could go around, you could chat to people all in one place, one very quick turnaround, get that first sense of who's right for you, and work out who you could then continue the education with. The other one was, people were saying it's almost what they wanted was a dating service, where they kind of put in the characteristics that they were looking for. And there was something that said, look, these 5, almost like a visitor information center that is unbiased. These 5 are the best for your needs. Go and talk to them. Now, I foresee that there are practical difficulties with that, but I think it really is worth exploring both of those. You will continue to use standard ones like emails, like brochures, all of those things, particularly materials that do that job of persuasion and dealing with issues like culture, dealing with all of those things. But I do think that those plus, the power of a really great website would do that job of how are you selling to people, and having a great database that really is able to understand and build that, which is where I think the education fairs may come in as well. Laurie, if you could.
Left or a swipe right for choosing which operator they want.
Yeah, we need travel agents who specialize. So pulling to the end of this, at least 1 in 11 schools has not participated certainly within the last 5 years. Many schools are making a trade-off between that compulsory participation and optional participation, where they're sort of saying, is it linked to the community, or is it we strongly encourage it? Principals are a key gatekeeper in driving growth in uptake, but you do need to work out who is convertible and who isn't. That, as I said, the market is highly heterogeneous, but a key fault line is that done for me versus totally bespoke. And I do feel that there is a strong role for Outdoors New South Wales and ACT, that connected to product, working with people to do the experience design around some of the issues. And in some cases, people are saying they kind of felt that some of the operators, I'm sure none of the ones on this call, business skills, parental attitudes. And again, we need to be thinking about who are the schools within this heterogeneous larger audience that you're targeting, so that you can pull on the levers that are very specific to those cultural issues, those social issues, those behavioral issues going forward. And as I said, you need to demonstrate the value of outdoor education versus broader nature-based experiences, and having that more detailed, and by that I mean really quite individualized understanding of needs, not what you could get from something like this, but from what you would have from having a really great CRM system, really great databases. And that most consistent rational barrier to greater participation remains cost. If you can flick to the next slide to talk about where we go from here.
I forgot to open the second one.
Oh, that's okay. Really, I think, I mean, obviously, I know you've all got to be somewhere else as well, but really, I think, Laurie, a conversation maybe at your next session where you talk about what else you'd like to know from this. I think for me, we finalize the rest of it. It's a very interactive process. So, we can be doing other stuff in the background. We can be setting up those final few deep dive interviews while that's happening, really to pull that together, get those bits done, firm up and size some of those drivers and barriers a little bit more. But to be honest, I went preparing this presentation, I really feel like we're further along than I realized when I wrote the interim report in thinking about this and looking to really wrap this up and get you guys moving in the next month.
Yeah, brilliant, Carolyn. And look, I'd love to ask anyone if you've got a a question for Carolyn on anything you've heard, or to answer her question, what else do you want to know? What is driving your questions on anything to do with your schools or your activities? Has anyone got any questions at this point in time?
There's a lot to take in. I do apologize.
Awesome. I mean, this is exactly what we wanted. And obviously out of this, we'll be able to produce, Carolyn will be producing a beautiful report that will give us some tips and hints that you can deliver into your own businesses, as well as what we can do to support you in that, which you probably have. So look, I don't think there's any questions, but the love, there you go, you've got compliments. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for beaming in from the other side of the web. Please stay safe, and yeah, get back here quickly. And,
I don't think we'll be flying the traditional route.
No, I don't think you will. And just on that, obviously, can I just express anyone that's got family in Ukraine or connected in any way, my heart certainly goes out to you in what's going on over there at the moment.
Yeah, it's been a sobering day, I can safely say that. So
yes, I can imagine. Well, guys, thank you for sticking in there. It's obviously been of interest because we haven't lost hardly anyone. So thank you for joining us for another Connect and Share. Thanks again to Carolyn. And don't forget, we've got happy hour at 4 o'clock this afternoon if anyone wants to join us for that. Until next week, we will bid you farewell.
That's 5 a.m. Maybe I will. It might be a bit early though.
No, I don't think you'll be drinking too much at 5 a.m.